إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد بعدد كل داء ودواء وبارك وسلم عليه وعليهم كثيرا.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to the lessons on As-Seerah an-Nabawiyyah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. Today's lesson is on pre-Islamic trade. Even though the deserts inhospitable and all around were civilized people such as the Romans and the Persians. In the south you had the southern Arabian kingdoms, the Yemenite kingdoms, and they were conducting trade. You would kind of think that in the middle, where there was almost like a blank canvas, there was nothing there, that the Arabs weren't involved in that trade, because how would they trade? The conveyance, they didn't have the means, they didn't have the money, they wouldn't have had, and what would they trade in anyway? That's a big debate in historiography. That's a big debate that's still going on to this day, but we do know that they did trade. Now, even such a place as an inhospitable desert, people will trade. They will barter on small scales, they will exchange goods, and they will buy and sell on a small scale. The Bedouins would need the settled people, because the settled people would have things that they would need, and then the settled people would need the Bedouins. So the Bedouins would sell stuff like produce from their goats, their cows, their camels, curds, cheese, milk, whey, hides, leather, rope and stuff. Well, rope would probably have been made in the cities, and then, you know, from the cities they would buy rope, they would buy swords, they would buy armor, and anything else that they would need, like grains, flour, and things like that. However, Arabian trade is legendary for one or two things primarily, and for 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years it was famous for that, and that was as a transit route for frankincense and spices that came from only specific areas in the south, namely Oman, Hadramaut, Yemen, and Ethiopia. Those areas monopolized that trade, and the Arabs were bang in the middle of that trade, going from the south up to the north into the Persian Empire, into the Roman Empire, on into Europe, and from the Persian Empire via the Silk Road onto India and China. We have records from all of those areas proving that frankincense managed to work its way into every part of the known world at that time. So Arabia's most famous export was its aromatics, its frankincense and its myrrh. From the Hellenistic period onwards, when the pagans first realized that frankincense came from that area, it was the dream of the Greeks, it was the dream of the Romans, it was the dream of the Persians, and in fact even before that, Nabonidus and the Babylonians and the Assyrians, Akkadians, they all wanted to control the Yemen area, but it was very difficult to get to. They managed to get to, so for example, the Syrians managed to conquer parts of the Levant and as far as Egypt. The Akkadians also. The Persians managed to conquer up to Egypt, all of Syria, Iraq, and down into the west coast, all the way up to Yemen. And then they did control trade there. Nabonidus, which we look at, Nebu Na'id, I know his name from the original, Nabonidus is what they call it. I think that's what they call it. Nebu Na'id had his capital in Taima in northern Saudi Arabia along the trade route. He was there for 10 years and he levied taxes and he controlled trade from that area. huge quantities, I'm talking absolute huge quantities, for 2-3 millennia were burnt in the pagan temples of the Greeks and in the Romans. And it demanded a huge outflow from Ethiopia, from Yemen, from Oman, and it traveled up via ship as well as via the caravan trades, the traders, the middlemen as well, directly by the Minayans and Katabanic people and the Sabaeans, and also by the middlemen, the Arab tribes, which we're going to have a look at. This is a frankincense tree. For something that smells so nice, you'd think that the tree would be beautiful to look at, but it's actually quite an ugly tree, and they look stunted and gnarled and almost dwarfish compared to other trees. A single tree yields about 200 to 500 grams per year. That's not a lot. Considering the amount that was burnt, that's not a lot. It's like oud, the same thing in the Far East. Far East was famous for oud, India was famous for oud, and you don't get a lot out of a whole tree. Sandalwood as well, you don't get a lot from a whole tree. So it's a lot of production goes into producing something very little, and sometimes it's more than its weight in gold, what you're carrying, the liquid. And then so you can understand why it's expensive, because of the production cycle of it, and then to move it vast distances to other continents, you can understand how the cost goes up exponentially. It's harvested by wounding the bark and collecting the resin that is released from the wound. It's called tapping. Here you can see where they've tapped a tree and it's starting to drip and it resonates, it starts to get dry. Incidentally, when you chew it, it becomes the same color. It ends up like chewing gum. You can chew it as well. Here is a picture of a very early incense burner, inscribed with the 4 cents notes in old South Arabian. This is a stone incense burner, but even today, if you look at Arabia, you'll see incense burners that are just like this. They are like a square, like a cube, standing up with legs, and they're made of wood. The inside is going to be a tray of metal or something. So many things were traded. We're not going to look at exactly what was traded because that is disputed. But we do know that its most legendary and fabulous and famous export was frankincense and myrrh. So we're going to concentrate a lot on that today. So there were the primary kingdoms in the south that were responsible for this trade and had monopolized this trade were the Minaic, the Katabanaic, Hadramatic, and the Sabaeid kingdoms. Sabah, Sheba as we know it. And it was the most largest and the wealthiest of the 4. Pliny the Elder in his natural history says the chief productions of the Arabs are frankincense and myrrh, which last it bears in common with the country of the Togolatei. There is no country in the world that produces frankincense except Arabia, and indeed not the whole of that. Almost in the very center of that region are the Atramatei, community of the Sabaeid. The capital of his kingdom is Sabota, a place situate on a lofty mountain at a distance of 8 stations from this is the incense-bearing region known by the name of Sabah. The Greeks say that the word signifies a secret mystery. This district looks towards the northeast and is rendered inaccessible by rocks on every side, while it is bounded on the right by the sea, from which it is shut out by cliffs of tremendous height. The soil of this territory is said to be of a milky white, a little inclining to red. The forests extend 20 shunoi in length and half the distance in breadth. The length of the shunos, according to the estimate of Eratosthenes, is 40 stadii, or in other words 5 miles. Some persons, however, have estimated the shunos at no more than 32 stadia. In this district, some lofty hills take their rise, and the trees which spring up spontaneously run downwards along the declivities of the plains. It is generally agreed that the soil is argillaceous and that the springs which they take their rise are but few in number and of a nitrous quality. Adjoining are the Minoi, the people of another community through whose country is the sole transit for the frankincense along a single narrow road. The Minoi were the first people who carried on any traffic in frankincense, which they still do to a greater extent than any other persons, and hence it is that it has received the appellation of Minoan. It is the Saboi alone and no other people among the Arabians that behold the incense tree, and indeed not all of them, for it is said that there are not more than 3,000 families which have a right to claim the privilege by virtue of hereditary succession, and that for this reason those persons are called sacred and are not allowed while pruning the trees of gathering the harvest to receive any pollution either by intercourse with women or coming in contact with the dead. By those religious observations, it is that the price of the commodity is so considerably enhanced. Some persons, however, say that the right of gathering incense in the forest belongs to all these people in common, while others again state that they take their turns year by year. So here is probably some facts mixed with some fantasy. Herodotus did the same thing. That's why I didn't quote him, because his is a bit more fabulous than this story. But it goes to show that this is what the ancients knew about those southern empires and how they monopolized the trade, and how for them it became legendary and fantastical. In Christianity, frankincense is one of the gifts that the Magi from the Persian realms, the three wise kings, the story that they went to Jesus and they gave him frankincense and myrrh and gold. In a time before soap, as well as being used in the temples, you can only imagine in a time before soap where body odor was a constant concern, especially for aristocratic women, and not having soap or other forms of perfume, how they would rely on this. And they burn it, and even today in Arabia you can see where they burn frankincense or oud, and then they waft it. The women will put it underneath their abayas, the men will waft it, let it hit their beard and their scarves, and then cover themselves over it, and as a result they stay smelling nice for a long time, and any room or anything it's in holds on to that smell as well. And it's so popular even today in Arabia. In my time it was easily bought. Frankincense was easily bought from any market, and people would burn it. Oud was bought plentiful, and in Dubai, even in the toilets, I smelt them use oud. Like subhanallah, it's so expensive, people wouldn't use it. And it wasn't a normal toilet; it was a public toilet. I think it was a mosque toilet or an airport toilet. A mosque toilet, they used it. So in Mesopotamia, in the Egyptian world, in the Roman world, this was a natural perfume, and it has antiseptic properties, and it has other medical properties that they used it for as well. The Indians, the Chinese and the Persians used it for its medical properties. We have the earliest attested information about an expedition where he undertook to bring, and he brought back myrrh and frankincense, and that was like 4,500 years ago. That's the first attested expedition we have from the Egyptians. And we have archaeological evidence to suggest that the Persians, the Sumerians also were using it. Tal al-Muqayyir, which is which is a Akkadian city. Warqa, Iraq, this is where the name Iraq comes from. And Nufar, Nippur, yielded the most burners with this. So they found in the city of and Iraq, that's where the name Iraq comes from. And is the city of Ibrahim alayhi salam. This is from the Assyrian Akkadian time. They found a huge number of incense burners. They found 37 from Nippur, 31 from Tal al-Muqayyir, and they were discovered also in Syria and in Oman, which suggests that it was widespread from thousands of years ago, before the Romans and the Hellenistic period. The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Assyrians, the Arameans, and all those peoples, and in the south, the Egyptians also, they were using it. And these that shape, the four-shape cube incense burners, have been found in the strata over there. The Jewish faith also uses it as part of rituals at the sacred altar before the Ark of the Covenant. Here's a quote from Jeremiah: "To what purpose cometh there to me incense from Sheba, and the sweet came from a far country? Your burnt offerings are not acceptable, nor your sacrifices sweet unto me." It was also what the Queen of Sheba bought in quantities when she came to see King Solomon, Sulaiman alayhi salam. This was one of the royal gifts that she brought with her. In Psalms we have, "May my prayer be ever set as incense before you." It was used by the Chinese, Persians and Indians in their medicines. An interesting anecdote I bought aged frankincense oil. It also comes in like a tincture as well. And I bought an aged one, and I was going to mix Bulgarian rose because that's the only thing that kind of would have gone with it. And it smelled smoky, and it was dark in color as opposed to the lighter ones. And it aged, and it smelled very smoky, very strong smell. And I sold some to somebody, a fellow worker, co-worker, when I was living in Saudi, and he gave it to someone that had, I think, some kind of body eczema or something like this, and he would spoon feed it, his family would spoon feed it to him, and like 1 or 2 spoons every day, and that's the only thing out of all the medication he was on that actually worked for him. So they bought all my stock. I couldn't do nothing with it. I sold all my stock to them. They kept coming back to buy that stock by that colleague of mine. And then even when I had left Saudi, I think they inquired as to if I could, that same colleague of mine inquired as to if I could get hold of any more. And I don't think I was able to get hold of that. That was like stock that I bought off somebody, and he had exhausted his supply. They also found evidences of it in the Achaemenid, the Hakamanoush, the Achaemenid Empire, and in Harappan poetry. So the Achaemenid Empire, we're talking about the north here, so from Iraq upwards, Central Asia and Iran, and then Harappan would be the area of Pakistan today. They found the burners there, pottery shards, and they found Harappan pottery in Oman, which proves that there was trade going on between those two countries back then, those two civilizational empires. And it's been found as far away as China. I think it made its way to China in the 9th, 10th century and afterwards, and it was found there as well. The southern trade went up north via the caravan routes to Nabatea and on to Rome. So from Yemen, it went up to the north to Nabatea, and from there it spread. So some trade routes went across the desert towards Iraq, and the other through Nabatea into the Roman world. And the ones that went into Iraq and then the Persian domain, they would go up into the Caucasus and travel along the Silk Road and go on the overland route into Central Asia, and then also into India. And then there were direct routes as well, the sea routes that went up the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, and that went up the Indian Ocean as well. In the Roman Empire, due to the huge demand of it, prices rose, and it was seen as a marker of wealth and status and magnanimity, especially for kings to serenade their courts with the smells of frankincense and to gift it to dignitaries and everything. And Emperor Nero of the Roman Empire, he used tens of kilograms of incense at the funeral of his consort Poppaea. Tiglath-Pileser III, that's 700 BC, in one of his raids, he boasts about seizing 5,000 bags of all kinds of spices from Shamsi, queen of the Arabs, and also received tribute of spices from the people of Massa, in Taima and Saba. So he's boasting about how much his spices and incense he's taken from them. In Genesis is mentioned, as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. This is in the very first book of the Old Testament, mentioning that the caravans of the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites are the Arabs. Exodus mentions that Moses was to use 500 shekels of liquid myrrh as a core ingredient of the sacred anointing oil. The verse is, take the following fine spices, 500 shekels of liquid myrrh, half as much, 250 shekels of fragrant cinnamon, 250 shekels of fragrant calamus, 500 shekels of cassia, all according to the sanctuary shekel, and a hin of olive oil. Make them into a sacred anointing oil, a fragrant blend, the work of a perfumer. It will be the sacred anointing oil. It was so lucrative that Tiglath-Pileser III, he sacked Gaza in order to gain control of the South Arabian trade route. And it made the Nabateans very prosperous. Petra was one of the caravanserai sites for the travelers to stop as well. And then there were many other sites en route, and it made the Nabateans very rich off the back of this trade. Herodotus mentions, when the Arabians gather frankincense, they burn storax, the gum of which is brought into Greece by the Phoenicians in order to raise a smoke to drive off the flying snakes. These snakes are small in size and of various colors, and great numbers of them keep guard over all the frankincense-bearing trees, and the only way to get rid of them is by smoking them out with storax. Okay, so because this story sounds ridiculous, I thought I didn't include this story, but it seems like I have. So this is what Herodotus has mentioned regarding the tapping of the trees, and this is what needs to be done. Frankincense and myrrh are found in the Arabian Peninsula about Sabah, Hadramaut, Kataban, and the Ma'an, the Mamali. The trees of frankincense and myrrh grow partly in the mountains, partly on private estates at the foot of the mountains, wherefore some are under cultivation and others not. The frankincense tree, it is said, is not tall, about 5 cubits high, and it is as much branched. It has a leaf like that of the pear, but much smaller and very grassy in color, like roe. The bark is altogether smooth, like that of a bay. The myrrh tree is said to be still smaller in stature and more bushy. It is said to have a tough stem, which is contorted near the ground and is stouter than a man's leg, and to have a smooth bark like that of an android tree. Spelling here, it's taken from probably how it was spelled when these books were compiled, probably a couple of hundred years ago, so that's why the spellings are a bit off. Eratosthenes of Cyrene is the first person to refer to the transport of aromatic goods from South Arabia. Kataban produced myrrh and Hadramaut produced frankincense, and both of these and other aromatics they trade to merchants. The latter come to these parts from Aliyah, which is modern Aqaba, as far as Minea in 70 days, and Goboy arrive at Hadramaut in 40 days, cited in Strabo. Artemidoros of Ephesus, writing 2,100 years ago, tells us that those who live close to one another in South Arabia receive in constant succession the loads of aromatics and deliver them to their neighbors as far as Syria and Mesopotamia, again cited by Strabo. Pliny the Elder says, the chief products of Arabia are frankincense and myrrh. It used to be the custom, when there were fewer opportunities of selling frankincense, to gather it only once a year. But the present day demand introduces a second harvesting. The earlier and natural gathering takes place at about the rising of the dog star, when the summer heat is most intense. They make an incision that once a year, or at least once a year or more, depending on the health of the tree, it's called tapping. So you make cuts into the tree, and the juice flows out. The resin starts to flow out. You know, sometimes the resin starts to flow out, and then it's collected, and that, as it dries, it becomes frankincense. Pliny the Elder mentions frankincense, after being collected, is conveyed to Shabwa on camels, and a tithe estimated by measure and not by weight is taken by the priest. It can only be exported through the country of the Katabanians, and accordingly a tax is paid on it to the king of that people as well. The capital is Thimna, which is 1,487 miles distance from the town of Gaza in Judea on the Mediterranean coast. The journey is divided into 65 stages with halts for camels. Fixed portions of the frankincense are also given to the priests and the king's secretaries, but besides these, the guards and all the attendants and the gatekeepers and servants also have their pickings. Indeed, all along the route they keep on paying, at one place for water, at another for fodder, or the charges for loading at the halts and the various tolls. Hence expenses mount up to 688 denarii per camel before the Mediterranean coast is reached, and then again payment is made to the customs officers of our empire. Consequently, the price of the best frankincense is 6, of the second best 5, and of the third best 3 denarii a pound. No tithes are given to a god from myrrh, as it also grows in other countries. However, the growers have to pay a quarter of the yield to the king of the Katabanians. For the rest, it is brought up all over the district from the common people and packed into leather bags, and our perfumers have no difficulty in distinguishing the different sorts by the evidence of the scent and consistency. The prices vary with the supply of buyers. That of myrrh oil ranges from 3 to 5 denarii a pound, whereas the top price for cultivated myrrh is 11 denarii. The Christians, when the Roman Empire started to Christianize, they moved away from pagan rituals, and the demand dropped because they wouldn't burn it as offerings for pagan idols, obviously, but they did use it in church ceremonies. They would burn it when they would do the liturgical services, and also to petition saints. So then you have to really wonder, did they leave paganism? Tabari even mentions, he says, they reigned, they prospered, yet their glory passed. Now deep entombed they lie this many a year. He's talking about all the great empires that were part of this trade. And he's saying that they reigned, they prospered, and then their glory passed. Now they're deeply entombed in front of us today. So he's talking about the transition of life, and then all glory and all wealth will surely fade. Now I can't get these words out. The Palmyreans were a mixed people of Arabian, Greek, and other Semitic people in the area of Syria. And it's a true caravan city in that the city, if we look at the plan of the city today, it's laid out where they've got a central highway, and then it turns, and that's where they funneled all the trade into the city. ISIS destroyed parts of that city, as they did with many of the ruins across the Levant and Mesopotamia, part of their crazy drive to purge. God knows what they were trying to do. Here's some pictures of it. Being traders, they buy Indian and Arabian goods from the territory of the Persians and dispose of it in that of the Romans. So because they were situated right in the middle of the trade routes between the Persians, the Arabs, and the Romans, they would, the halts, that caravans that would stop there, then they would offload and buy from them, and then they would take it further and then sell it at a profit. And goods as far as India were coming to them via them as well. Other people didn't really celebrate their trade, they just did it. The phrase, a quiet trade. Whereas the Palmyreans, they really celebrated it with gusto. They honored their caravan chiefs and financiers with statuses and inscription. There's a statue of Thaimursu, son of Thaima, son of Muqimu, son of Gabba, chief of the caravan, which has been made for him by the members of the caravan who came up with him from Chorax, because he paid the expenses, 300 gold coins, ancient currency, and was well pleased to them. To his honor and to the honor of Yaddi and Abdibol, his sons, in the month of May, the year 504. Here's a limestone relief from a sarcophagus in the camp of Diclotian, Palmyra, showing two caravan leaders with a camel. So here you can see the head of a caravan carrying a camel. They're dressed in what looks like Roman garb for the time. Here's a view of Palmyra with the temple of Bel in Syria. And Palmyra was actually an empire in its own right at one point. It was ruled by Queen Zenobia, in Aramaic Bat Zabai, daughter of Zabai. I think Zabai, Zabib means raisin in Arabic. So in Aramaic, would that also mean raisin? So at some point, she covered from Anatolia all the way down to Egypt and North Arabia. So Syria, Jordan, Sinai, Gaza, and Arabia. And the parts of Arabia she controlled were Dedan, and Al-Ula would be closed, Taima would be closed, Tabuk would be closed. These are all trading cities. So she controlled a vast empire and a rich empire. It's an ancient city that traded, it's an ancient city, famous city. Trading caravans passed through this walkway here. And it grew so rich that it was able to create this great colonnade. These buildings have stood for over 2,000 years, only to be destroyed by ISIS, some of them. Here's an inscription on a pillar honoring Julius Aurelius Zenobius, believed to be Zenobius' father. Then we have the Nabateans. Now, they also sat astride the trade routes, and considerable trade passed through them as well, which made them very rich as well. And they also at one point controlled Petra, Bosra, all the way down up to Taima, Al-Ula, Dedan, and Madan Saleh. They covered all of those areas, and which were rich areas and where trade passed and were known halts on the way. Alexander's general Antigonus Cyclops also tried to gain control over the trade routes without success. And on the route in the I think this is the cities of Taima and Al-Ula, they've actually found names Minayan. The name Minayan comes up. So it seems like there was a trading colony of Minayans that were based there as well. So they were obviously interested in funneling their own trade further and then buying stuff and then taking it back south. And we had the we had the sea route and we had the overland route. And when the Romans tried to capitalize on the sea route, southern Arabian piracy started, because they didn't want the sea route in place. They wanted to keep it on the overland route because it was more lucrative for them. Even though taking stuff up by sea is much cheaper, but there were many reasons why they still would use the old route alongside the sea routes. Here you can see the trade routes crisscrossing Arabia. So you can see how in the south, Hadramaut and Ma'rib and the Sabaean Empire, how it would travel up to Najran, and then Qaryat al-Faw, the rename of, that's the name today, there's another name for that in the ancient times, that was the trading city they've excavated as well. From there it would skirt across the empty quarter to go into eastern Arabia and onto Bahrain and whatnot, and then north into the Persian territories and the Babylonian territories. And then on the western seaboard, it would go up Tamar, and then it would go up to Mecca, and then from Mecca into Yathrib, and then the Lihyanites and Hegra, Tamar, and into the Didan, and then into the Nabatean kingdom, and from there it would go either into Gaza and Egypt, or it would go further on into the Roman Empire, and then Asia Minor, and then the Caspian, and on to India. And it was a truly global trade of just incense. So in the Periplus Marius, according to Periplus Marius Etheri, this is a map according to him. Here's the international trade routes. So the sea routes would go off the southern coast of Arabia, and it would travel into ports into India, and then ports that would be near Pakistan today, it would travel up. So that would go through the mountains into Central Asia, skirting around the Himalayas and those going through that would be the Hindu Kush, most probably it would be the Khyber Pass and other passes there, into Bactria, and then on into China. It would be the long tortuous route because you can't go across the mountains from India into Tibet. It's just the impenetrable. And then you could see the sea routes across the Mediterranean as well into the heart of the Roman Empire, up the Red Sea as well. This is from the 1st century AD. And in the south you can see the kingdoms, the Himyarite kingdom. You can see the Parthian cities as well. And it was spices, wine, gold, ivory, metals, cloth, aromatic flowers, silk and precious stones. These were some of the things that were traded. The Lihyan and Didan in north central Arabia, in the north of the Arabian Peninsula, just on top of Hijaz, further up from Medina. These cities were occupied from the 8th to the 1st centuries BCs. It was an Arab kingdom that sat astride trade routes. They ruled from Yathrib up to the Levant. And at various times, various kingdoms developed. Some were city-states, some were a bit larger in that area. Here's a picture of Tamar. And Tiglath-Pileser received tribute for Tamar. Sennacherib named one of Nineveh's gates the Dessa Gate, recording the gift of the Sumanite and Temanites entered through it. So the cities must have been considerably rich and of influence for someone who held an empire like Sennacherib to name one of his gates after the name of those areas. The Kedarites also ruled it, and as mentioned earlier, Nabonidus conquered and lived there for 10 years. And it's interesting because he's from a civilized area, the area of Iraq, and then for you to move into a desert where seemingly there was nothing and live there for 10 years showed how much wealth was passing through that area and how civilized those areas must have been. There was also a flourishing Jewish community in Tamar, Didan and Tabuk. They were inhabited by Jews, famous Jews who were tradesmen as well as craftsmen. They held on to the various trades in the area, as in carpentry. Pre-Islamic poetry: unto God will I make my complaint heard, but not unto man, because I am a sojourner in Tamar, Tamar of the Jews. So if they're calling it Tamar of the Jews, then there must have been a lot of Jews there. And we know from history there were Jews there in Medina. there were Jewish tribes, and in Khaybar and up from Khaybar all the way to Tabuk, in history we have written references of Jews having lived in that area. And it's interesting, and we look at further in the Seerah inshallah, of how the Jews ended up there and what they were doing in that area and why they were there as well. And when we say Jews, they were certainly Jews, as in Jews by blood, and Arab tribes that converted to Judaism. And they became so intermingled that today we don't really know, which was predominant. Were they mostly Arabs that had become Jews, or were they mostly Jews, or were they an even mix? Qaryat al-Faw, here's a wall painting with a man's head that looks like a Yemeni face right there in southern Arabia. Qaryat al-Faw sits slightly to the right of the western trade route, and that's the trade route that takes you up towards the Persian Gulf on the right hand side of Arabia. And here you can see the other trade routes there as well. Bosra or Busra, famous trading city. Here's a picture of it here, the ruins of it. This is the city where Rasulullah encamped and did his trade as well. The Quraysh would go as far as the Roman Empire, and if they didn't go any further, they would stop at Busra and do their trade and then buy the goods and come back. Otherwise they would go forward. Here's a caravan in Busra in the mosaic work there. There was the first Nabatean city in the 2nd century BC, named after a Roman Bostrus. Under the Roman Empire, Bosra was named Nova Trajana Bosra. It was made capital of the Roman province of Arabia, Petraea, which is Rocky Arabia, which is North Arabia. It was at the juncture of several trade routes, and it was famous for Muslims because this is where the Quraysh would go. If they didn't go further into the Roman Empire, this is where the Quraysh would go and sell their goods. Rasulullah also, with Abu Talib, went to Basra and they sold their goods there. And then they would buy other goods and then they would come back to Mecca. By the 5th century, Christianity became the dominant religion. Here's the picture of the Basra baths and the ruins and the pillars. Here's a caravan in mosaic, probably entering Basra. Guys dressed as a Roman. And then, as we mentioned, there was the local trade between various tribes and various cities, where they would trade on a small scale, bartering and lending and sharing and buying and selling commodities that were locally made, cottage industries and the like, and even other commodities that they would get from further afield, they would sell in their local vicinity. And Arabia had markets, all of these, the exchange of grain, oil, clothes, wine, arms, all of this has been attested in the records we have for Arabia. Ibn Habib says the markets of the Arabs were 10 at which they would gather for their trading activities and other people would attend them. So Arabia had famous 10 or 12 markets, and they would have a market in each locality that would go like in a clockwise, and it would end with the market, the 3 markets in the Hijaz area in and around Mecca, culminating in the Hajj. So it was like a yearly cycle of famous markets that they would have, and each market would last a couple of weeks to a month, and it would be like a festival, carnival atmosphere where they would trade and poetry exhibitions and probably wrestling and magic tricks and clowning around. And as they do, you can imagine an Oriental bazaar where men, women and children would go, and it would be like a festive atmosphere. These were famous markets. Ibn Habib mentions the markets of the Arabs were 10 at which they would gather for their trading activities, and other people would attend them and would be safe in respect to their lives and their possessions. Amongst them was Jummat al-Jandal, taking place in the month of Rabi. Its conveners were Ghassan and Kalb. Whichever of the 2 tribes had the upper hand would run it. So this was in their vicinity. Then there was Mushakkar in the region of Hajar in East Arabia, the market of which took place in Jum'ada 1, and which was run by Tamim, the clan of Mundar ibn Sawa. Then there was Sohar in Oman, taking place in Rajab on its first day and not requiring any protection. Then the Arabs would travel from Sohar to Daba, in which Jalunda and his tribe would collect the tithe. Then there was the market of Shihr in Makhra, and its market took place in the shade of the mountain on which was the tomb of the Prophet Hud. There was no protection at it, and Makhra would run it. Then there was the market of Aden, taking place on the first day of the month of Ramadan, at which the Persian nobles would collect the tithe, and from which perfume would be conveyed to the rest of the provinces. Then there was the market of Sana'a, taking place halfway through the month of Ramadan, at which the Persian nobles would collect the tithe. Then there was the market of Rabi'a in Hadramaut, to get to which protection was needed, for the land was not under anyone's authority, and whoever was strongest triumphed. Once there, Kinda provided protection at it. Then there was the market of ʿUkāẓ in the highest parts of Najd, taking place in the month of Dhul Qa'dah. Quraysh would go to it, and other Arabs, though most of them of the tribal confederation of Mudar, and there would be boasting competitions of the Arabs, settlement of blood widths and truce negotiations. And then there was the markets of al-Majāz. So this is him describing those markets, and it mentions people being safe and not being safe. It's because Arabia was a lawless place, and in order for them to travel was very difficult. When we talk about the ilaf of Mecca, inshallah, we'll mention the travel routes and how they were organized by making agreements with the tribes. So you'd have to have prior agreements, and these marketplaces were sacred. So no war, no pillaging, no, like sometimes in places like that you'd see enemies with each other, and then they'd have their shootouts. We'd call it shootout today, but it would be killing each other with arrows or knives or whatnot. None of that was allowed. They were in effect sacred. So there were places for trade, and they were safe, and only because they were safe could you have that in Arabia. So there were rules applied to it, and whoever ran it, and some of those Arab tribes were under the sway of the Ghassanids or the Lukhmites, and who were under the sway of the Persians and Romans. So the money would filter up. So they would take a tithe, which is like 10% or whatever tax they would take on all of the earnings that were generated from those markets. They were like cooperative ventures, you can call it in another way. Safety of transit, person and goods were guaranteed, either by the sanctity of the site. So some sites they would make them sacred, or by tribal alliances that would guarantee safety for everybody, or by greater entities like Kinda or the Ghassanids or the Lukhmites or Rabi'a, or during the holy months. So like ʿUkāẓ was in Dhul Qa'dah, and there was no fighting in that month. These pictures were taken by Thizla, and I put them up deliberately here. This is in 1945, so this can give you some kind of a sense of what these markets were like. This is a market of livestock traders in the city of Ad-Dali. Here's another picture. You can see the simple houses up to the 1950s, what is now the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, how it was like. And you can see some of the stuff, the cloth, some kind of reed mat guys carrying, and how desperately poor they were in that. Look at the clothes. Here's another gathering place. So on the guy on the donkey, you can see the donkey's laden with something, saddled on both sides with something that probably rope. And then behind him is another animal, and they've got like a pot wrapped in rope and held in place by rope. There's another picture. There's livestock in the background, and they're carrying long guns, wearing turbans. There's another picture. You can see wood on the floor, you can see rope, camels, sacks. And you can see women there as well. There's women in the markets. Al-Yaqubi and Al-Afghani mention more than 10 markets where people would gather for trade. These places were considered protected and safe for the traders throughout the year during their stay. These markets were not confirmed to any specific location, but were held in different places in the Arabian Peninsula. They were also a meeting place for poets and missionaries who would conduct the tribes in the hope of influencing some of its members and follow their religion. The Prophet ﷺ has mentioned in some traditions used to go out to these markets to call people to the new faith. The most famous of these markets at the advent of Islam were Dummat al-Jandal, Hajar, Sohar, Diba, Ash-Shahr, Adan, Sand, al-Majāz, Mujanna and ʿUkāẓ. Some historic sources mention that there were 13 pre-Islamic markets, and the first of these was Jummat al-Jandal. Quraysh controlled the three markets of ʿUkāẓ, Mujannah and al-Majāz. These were held during the sacred pilgrimage season, that month, and the other sacred months. Thus the Arabs would gather there and they would feel safe. Now just a brief look at the individual markets and what they were famous for. So Jummat al-Jandal was a famous market in the Jawf region from the first day of Rabi al-Awwal for a fortnight. Heads of tribes, mostly from Kalb and Ghassan, would decide the timing. Taxes collected went paid to those who supervised them. Method of trade was by throwing stones. So they would throw a stone at a good, like a lot, like a sack or something, the whole lot. They would throw a stone, and where it would land, that was the handshake, that was the purchase, that was the deal done. They wouldn't have a look at the entirety of the stock or what it was. Then there was al-Mushakkar market. It was a fortress close to Hajar belonging to Abdul Qais. Its inhabitants were from the Azd tribe, the great tribe that immigrated up from the Yemen. The market commenced at the beginning of Jummat al-Thani and continued until the end of the month. Persian merchants travelled by sea to attend this market and traded with the Bedouins and settlers. The Quraysh merchants also participated and other traders came under their protection. The method used for sale was by touching. So this time you'd have to touch the good. Then there was the Hajar market. This market was held in Rabi al-Thani. Al-Mundhir bin Sawa, king of Bahrain, was responsible for the taxation of traders. Indian and Persian traders bought goods to Hajar market, hence it was considered more important than Jummat al-Jandal. It is reported that bin Tamim attacked the Persian emperor's caravan, which was carrying musk, ambergris and jewels. Consequently, he sent an army which defeated bin Tamim, seized their money and abducted their womenfolk. It seems that the Persians considered the Hajar market to be of considerable importance. The area of Hajar was also famous for its dates. Then there is the Sohr market. Sohri was one of the pre-Islamic markets located on the east coast of Oman. Arabs considered Sohr one of the principal markets which provided them important products from the eastern world. The market used to open from the 1st to the 5th of Rajab. It seems to have continued trading until the 20th of Rajab. The Diba market was one of the pre-Islamic markets located on the east coast of Oman. It was frequented by traders from the Far East and Persia as well as from the Arabian Peninsula. It started at the end of Rajab. All matters and trade took place according to a barter system. Ḥubāsha market. Ḥubāsha was considered one of the most important markets in Western Arabia. It was held in Tihama during Rajab, and the people of Hijaz and Yemen would trade there. A Shihr market is the name given to the area of the southern coast of the Arabian Peninsula between Aden and Oman, which was known as Shihr Mahra. According to al-Marzuki of Diba market, the traders would come to Shihr. Then the Aden market, this market started on the first day of Ramadan after the traders had moved on from Shihr and continued for 10 days. The most important commodity for trade was perfume. Possibly a high volume of trade took place in these markets because of the greater degree of freedom which traders enjoyed there. The Sana market started in the mid of Ramadan and continues until the end of the month. The most frequently traded goods were beads and leather, cotton, linen, kohol, dyes and saffron. Then the ʿUkāẓ market. The ʿUkāẓ market was the most famous of pre-Islamic Arabian markets. It was the largest trade market for all the Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula. Every region brought its produce to it. It was also frequented by poets who would recite their poems. The wine was bought from Hajar, Iraq, Gaza and Basra, and butter from the countryside. Embroidered garments and leather were bought from Yemen. ʿUkāẓ became a cosmopolitan place and depicted different social customs. It was a free market, no tax and no charges paid to safeguard trade. The Quraysh traders had a tremendous role in this market, and it appears that they would encourage tribes and the traders to attend, and they had even made an agreement with Tamim to let this market free. Mujannah market. Mujannah is near Makkah, situated at the Mural Zahran near Mount Al-Asfal. The market was held during the last 10 days of Dhul Qa'dah. People would come here after the end of ʿUkāẓ market and stay for 10 days to continue their trade and other activities as they had done at ʿUkāẓ. Most excellent quality of wine was brought to Mujannah from Syria, Basra and Gaza. My wine lovers would come from a far distance to buy it at the Mujannah market. Then the al-Majāz market. Al-Majāz is situated at Mina between Makkah and Arafat in the territory of Hudayl. The Arabs would come after sighting the moon of Dhul Hijjah. They would stay there for 8 days buying and selling. Arabs who missed the other markets would come to this place. Al-Majāz was a popular market as it took place during the Hajj pilgrimage season. Many Arab traders and notables would gather for trade. After ʿUkāẓ, it was the market of al-Majāz, well known for its activities of trade, literary content and resolving disputes. The Natat Khaybar market. Khaybar is situated to the north of Medina. It was inhabited by Jews, migrants who had settled down in the Hijaz region in the past. They were engaged in trade and agriculture. A well-known Jewish trader, Abu Rafi al-Khaybari, carried out trade journeys to Syria and imported various kinds of garments. It seems that the Jews monopolized the trade of dates, barley and wheat in the north of the Hijaz. Due to the situation of this town on the main trade route between Syria and Yemen, its inhabitants participated in the trade. It was one of the stations of the trade caravans to Syria. The Quraysh caravans which used to pass through Khaybar would trade in this market. Adrut market. Adrut was a town in southern Syria known today as Dir'a. Dar'a, is it Dar'a or Dir'a? It was considered one of the important markets in Basra. The Arabs used to trade, and Arab poets also mentioned its importance in their poetry. The Adurat market was managed by Roman employees in pre-Islamic times and was situated about 1 night journey from Basra. Thinking Basra here, it would be Busra. The Al-Hira market. Al-Hira market was the name of a town situated in the north of Kufa. It was the town of considerable fame in the Arabian Peninsula. Possible that Quraysh had learned writing skills from the people of Al-Hira. Al-Isfahani narrated the commodities sold in Al-Hira market were displayed in open for the customers. Such a practice was hardly practiced in pre-Islamic times. Leather, perfume, clothes, jewel, horses, etc. were displayed in the market. These were bought from Syria, Yemen, Oman, Hijaz, Bahrain, India and Persia, in addition to the camels, sheep and all their other products bought by Bedouins who were local inhabitants. At the same time, Al-Hira was a meeting place for poets, scholars and preachers. Debates and contests were held between poets just like the other markets. We have no reports of the exact time of this market. It was situated in the domain of the Lahmids, hence the taxes were paid to them. Then the Oman market. Arab traders would move on to this after Hajar market because this market was located at the trading route which was the center of Persia, India and Ethiopia. Goods from all these areas were brought to that country to be exchanged for goods from the Yemen, Hijaz and Syria. The two most important markets in Oman were Sohar and Diba. So as well as these markets and what was the commodities that were sold there, Arabia also had other industries. It had a mining industry for a long time. Copper, the working of copper was carried out in the Oman region since the late 3rd millennium BC. West Arabia also had gold. Diodorus mentions gold they discover in underground galleries which have been formed by nature and gather in abundance. It is not that which has been fused into artificial nuggets out of gold dust, but the virgin gold which is called from its condition when found unfired gold, for it is not smelted from ores as is done among other peoples, but is dug out directly from the earth. And as for size, the smallest nugget found is about as large as a fruit stone, and the largest not much smaller than a Persian walnut. This gold they wear about both their wrists and necks, perforating it and alternating it with transparent stones. And since this precious metal abounds in their land, whereas there is a scarcity of copper and iron, they exchange it with merchants for equal parts of the latter wares. Robert Hoyland mentions about these mines. This mine has recently been located and studied. It covers some 10 hectares, 25 acres and comprises at least 30 tunnels longer than 10 meters. One tunnel is over 150 meters, 30-40 meters wide and several meters high, and is linked to the surface for purposes of ventilation and transporting the ore by 10 shafts of between 10 and 25 meters in height, each cut through solid rock. A charcoal sample from the bottom of an ore heap yielded a date by radiocarbon techniques of AD 600. All this makes more understandable the pertinent reply of Saif ibn the Yazan to the Persian emperor in 570, who had refused safe troops but offered him money instead. What do I want with money when the earth of my land is gold and silver? Now, also what's interesting is that we know Abu Bakr as-Siddiq had access to gold. It was most probably this mine in West Arabia. And Rasulullah also had access to gold. He would gift it to people that would come. So it's probably from the same mine. About 1,000 locations in West Arabia show signs of past mining activity. One site called Mahad ad-Dahab, Cradle of Gold, has been radiocarbon dated to 950 BC, then again to AD 430, 830. So as late as 830 they were mining from there. And so, I'm starting from 950. So for over 1,000 years they've been mining. In the Book of Kings, in the Bible, it mentions King Solomon equipped a fleet at Ezon-Geba, which is near Ayla on the shores of the Red Sea in Edom. For this fleet, Hiram, king of Tyre, sent men of his own experienced sailors to serve with those in Solomon's service. They went to Opar and took on 420 talents of gold, which they brought back to Solomon. In Genesis, Opar is among the sons of Yoktan between Sheba and Palestine. This is West Arabia. And Ayla is Aqaba. And the kingdom of Edom was just north of that. And this is also where Agatharchides of Cnidus locates gold. His information going back to Ariston, who explored the west coast of Arabia for one of the early Ptolemies in Egypt. He says, down through the middle of their country there flows a river, meaning a dry river valley, which has 3 courses. It carries down gold dust in such great profusion that the mud which accumulates in the mouth shines in the distance. The inhabitants of the place are ignorant of how to work this metal. They are extremely hospitable, not to all men, but to those who cross over from the Peloponnese and Bottia. This is because of some mythical story connected with Hercules. Silver was also found in the peninsula. In South Arabia there was silver. There's a statement, there is not in Khorasan or anywhere else a mine comparable to that of Radrad in Yemen, which is situated at the border between Nihem and the district of Yam in the land of Hamdan, northeast of Sana'a. It has been abandoned since 270. The inhabitants of Radrad were all Persians, descendants of those who arrived there in the Pre-Islamic period and in the days of the Umayyads and Abbasids, and they were called Pit Persians. The village of the mine was large, and there was flowing water and palm trees, and commodities would pass to and fro between it and Basra via Aqiq, Falaj, Yamama and Bahrain. In 1 week a camel load of silver was extracted, 20,000 silver coins, making approximately 1 million per year. There were 400 furnaces, and if a bird flew over the mining village, it would fall down dead on account of the fire from the furnaces. Hamdani. In summary, we can say that Arabia, as in the desert part of Arabia, sat astride all of the trade routes, and no doubt the southern Arabian trade that moved forward, they used as retainers, handlers, as security guards, the Bedouin tribes, and Mecca sat in the middle. We still don't know Mecca's exact role in these trade routes. We do know that Mecca had its own trade, which we'll look at, inshallah, in the next episode. But what Mecca's role was in regarding these trade routes, we're not too sure of. And trade went up into the Nabateans and the Palmyrians, and from there onto Romans and onto Roman Europe, and then with the Persian domains up into Central Asia, India, and as far away as China. And then there were the sea routes as well, up the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, and then the Indian Ocean going around to the Arabian coast all the way to India. SubhanAllah, all for the love of frankincense and other spices. And there were a plethora of items, everyday household items. You would find them being traded up and down through the harsh desert terrain. There will always be a trade where there will be man. So it doesn't matter the conditions, where men live, there will be trading. And certainly the use of the camel extenuated the trade. Camels would travel further in a day, take heavier loads, and need less water. So you could go from like your pit stops, your watering holes would be fine in between now, because the camels would be able to traverse longer distances, and you would be able to get to other areas that you would not have been able to get with had you used a donkey or had walked. Initially people walked. With the camel came the adopting at a later date of a suitable mount for it, where you could load goods on as well. Spices, frankincense, perfume, hides, cloth, leather, rope, all manner of things were bought, sold and bartered. This is, I mean, it's not an in-depth study of pre-Islamic Arabian trade, but it's just more of a highlight, a basic understanding of trading in the Arabian Peninsula before the coming of Islam. So that's it for this lesson. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
سيدنا محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على أسعد ما محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نور الهدى محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.